After my ex-husband abandoned me for another woman, fate crossed our paths 10 years later. His reaction to seeing my new life was unforgettable. She turned in the king-size bed to look at her husband, Michael, who was still asleep. His heart was filled with love when he saw her serene face. They had been married for 5 years, and each day seemed better than the last. Sarah quietly got up and headed to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. As she beat eggs to make omelets, her mind wandered to their plans for the future: a house in the suburbs, maybe a couple of kids. Everything seemed to be falling into place. Half an hour later, Michael walked into the kitchen, yawning and stretching. Sarah felt butterflies in her stomach, like she always did when she saw him. She approached him and placed a soft kiss on his lips. "Good morning, my love," Sarah said fondly. Michael smiled, but Sarah noticed something strange in his eyes. Was it guilt? No, I was probably imagining things. "Good morning, sweetheart," Michael responded, avoiding her gaze. "It smells delicious." They sat down to breakfast, and Sarah tried to start a conversation. "Hey, honey," he began, "I was thinking we could go see those houses in New Jersey this weekend. What do you think?" Michael visibly tensed, and Sarah felt a pang of unease in her chest. About that," Michael hesitated, "I have to work this weekend. An important project, you know." Sarah frowned, disappointment weighing on her heart. It was the third time this month that Michael canceled his weekend plans. "But Michael," Sarah insisted, her voice shaking slightly, "we had agreed that this would be our year to take the next step. The house, the kids." Michael sighed heavily, avoiding her gaze. I know. It's just, things at work are very intense right now. I need to focus on my career." Sarah felt a lump in her throat. Something wasn't right, he could feel it in his bones. But he swallowed his fears and forced a smile. "It's okay, my love. I understand," he said, although his heart screamed otherwise. Michael finished his breakfast quickly and got up to go to work. Before leaving, he gave Sarah a quick kiss on the cheek. "I love you," he murmured, but the words sounded hollow. When the door closed behind him, Sarah was left alone in the kitchen, with a half-finished plate of food and a heart full of doubts. He looked around the apartment that once seemed perfect to him, and for the first time, he felt the walls closing in around him. "What's going on, Michael?" she whispered to herself, a lone tear rolling down her cheek. "What is happening to us?" The silence of the apartment was her only response, and Sarah had never felt so alone in her perfect life. One Friday afternoon, Sarah decided to surprise Michael in his office. With her heart pounding, she entered the glass and steel building where he worked. The elevator slowly rose to the 20th floor, each floor increasing his anxiety. Arriving at the reception, Sarah noticed the receptionist's uncomfortable look. "Good afternoon," Sarah said with a forced smile. "I'm looking for Michael Johnson." The receptionist paled. "Sorry, Mr. Johnson left early today." Sarah felt like she had been punched in the stomach. "But, he told me he would work late." At that moment, Jessica, a colleague of Michael's, passed by. Seeing Sarah, he stopped dead, a guilty expression on his face. "Sarah," Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know you would come." Sarah's heart raced. Something in Jessica's look, in her tone of voice, made all the pieces fit together at once. "Jessica," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "Where's Michael?" Jessica looked down, unable to face Sarah. I can't. Tell me," Sarah demanded, her voice breaking. Jessica sighed deeply. "It's at the Riverside Hotel. Room 507. Sarah's world collapsed in that instant. Without another word, she ran out of the office, tears blurring her vision. The taxi ride to the hotel was torture. Sarah felt like she couldn't breathe, like she was drowning in her own pain and rage. Arriving at the hotel, he ran up the stairs, unable to wait for the elevator. When he reached the 5th floor, he stopped in front of room 507. For a moment, he hesitated. Did he really want to see what was behind that door? With trembling hands, he used the card Jessica had given him. The green light blinked, and Sarah opened the door. What he saw shattered his heart into 1,000 pieces. Michael was there, in bed, with a woman Sarah recognized as his assistant. They both turned at the sound of the door, their faces frozen in an expression of horror. Sarah, Michael gasped, jumping out of bed. I can explain it. Sarah felt short of breath. The words didn't come out of his mouth. She could only stare at the scene in front of her, feeling her perfect world shatter. How could you? She finally managed to whisper, tears streaming down her cheeks. Michael tried to get closer. Sarah, please listen to me. Do not touch me. Sarah shouted, backing away. All this time, how long has this been going on? Michael looked down, unable to face the accusation in Sarah's eyes. I'm sorry. Sarah felt her heart break into 1,000 pieces. Everything he had believed in, everything they had built together, was a lie. It's over, Michael, Sarah said, her voice cold as ice. I never want to see you again. With those words, Sarah left the room, leaving behind not only Michael, but her dreams, her hopes, and the life she thought she would have. As she walked the streets of New York, alone and heartbroken, Sarah realized that nothing would ever be the same. The pain was unbearable, but somewhere, deep down, a small spark of determination began to burn. She would survive this, she promised herself. I had to do it. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of pain and confusion for Sarah. The divorce process was brutal, each signed document was like a dagger in her heart. Michael tried to contact her several times, but she was firm in her decision not to see him. One afternoon, while packing her things into boxes, Sarah found a photo from her wedding. He stared at her, tears blurring his vision. Why, Michael, he whispered, his voice breaking. Why wasn't I enough? The doorbell rang, breaking her out of her thoughts. Opening the door, he came face to face with Jessica, Michael's colleague who had revealed the truth to him. Sarah, Jessica said, visibly uncomfortable. I came to check on you. Sarah felt a mixture of gratitude and resentment. I'm surviving, he replied in a dull voice. Jessica entered the apartment, looking at the boxes scattered everywhere. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I know it's not enough, but... No, Sarah interrupted, her voice firm. Don't apologize. You did me a favor by telling me the truth. They sat on the couch, surrounded by the remains of the life Sarah had built with Michael. How do you move on after something like that? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jessica looked at her with compassion. One day at a time, Sarah. One day at a time. Sarah nodded, feeling the tears welling up again. It hurts so much. Every morning I wake up and for a second I forget everything, and then, reality hits me again. I know, Jessica said, placing a hand on Sarah's. But you're strong, Sarah. Stronger than you think. At that moment, Sarah's phone rang. He was his boss at the architecture firm. Sarah? I need you to come to the office. We have a situation with the Riverside project. Sarah panicked. I wasn't ready to face the outside world, to pretend that everything was okay. I don't know if I can, he replied, his voice shaking. Sarah, her boss said, her tone softening. I know what you're going through. But maybe this is just what you need. A distraction, a purpose. Sarah looked at Jessica, who nodded encouragingly. It's okay, he finally said. I'll be there in an hour. After hanging up, Sarah stood up, feeling like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. I don't know if I can do this, she said, more to herself than to Jessica. Jessica stood up and grabbed her shoulders. Of course you can. You are Sarah Johnson, the most talented architect I know. Don't let what Michael did define you. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling a spark of determination light up inside her. You're right, he said, straightening up. I won't let this destroy me. As she prepared to leave, Sarah looked at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but there was a new resolve in them. I can do this, she told herself. One step at a time. When she left the apartment, Sarah didn't know what the future held for her. The pain was still there, threatening to drown her at any moment. But for the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could rebuild his life from the ashes of his destroyed marriage. As she walked to the office, Sarah promised herself that she wouldn't let this betrayal define her. He would find the strength to move forward, to rebuild himself. The road would be long and difficult, but she was determined to take it, one step at a time. They turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Sarah immersed herself in her work, using it as a shield against the pain that threatened to consume her. But despite his efforts, darkness continued to lurk in the corners of his mind. One night, after another long day at the office, Sarah found herself alone in her new apartment. It was smaller than the one she shared with Michael, but it still felt too big, too empty. She poured herself a glass of wine and sat on the floor, surrounded by plans and models of her projects. She stared at the white wall in front of her, feeling the weight of her loneliness crush her. "What am I doing?" she whispered to herself, her voice breaking into the silence. The ringing of her phone startled her. It was a message from her best friend, Lucia. "Sarah, are you okay? I haven't heard from you in days. Answer me or I'll come to your house and break down the door." Sarah looked at the message, feeling a pang of guilt. He had been pushing everyone away, closing himself off in his own world of pain. With trembling fingers, he dialed Lucia's number. "Well?" Lucia's worried voice sounded on the other end of the line. "Lucia," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm not okay." There was a moment of silence, and then Lucia spoke, her voice full of determination. "I'm going there. Don't move." 20 minutes later, Lucia was at Sarah's door. Seeing her, Lucia's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Sarah," he said, hugging her tightly. "Why didn't you tell me you were so bad?" Sarah collapsed into her friend's arms, letting out all the pain she had been holding back. "I can't take it anymore, Lucia," he sobbed. "I try to be strong, I try to keep going, but it hurts so much. Every day is a struggle to get out of bed." Lucia guided her to the sofa, sitting next to her and taking her hands. "Sarah, look at me," he said firmly. "What you're feeling is normal. You've been through something terrible. But you don't have to face it alone." Sarah looked up, her eyes filled with desperation. "What if I never get over it? What if this pain never goes away?" Lucia squeezed his hands. "You'll get through it. You're the strongest person I know. But you need help, Sarah. You can't go on like this." "Aid?" Sarah asked, confused. "Yes, professional help," Lucia responded. "I know an excellent therapist. I think it would be good for you to talk to her." Sarah felt a mixture of fear and relief at the suggestion. "I don't know if I'm ready for that, Lucia." "No one's really ready," Lucia said with a sad smile. "But it's a necessary step. You don't have to decide now, but promise me you'll think about it." Sarah nodded slowly. "I'll think about it." That night, after Lucia left, Sarah lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in months, he felt a small glimmer of hope. Maybe, with help, he could find a way out of this darkness. He took his phone and, with trembling hands, wrote a message to Lucia. "Okay. I'll make the appointment with the therapist. Thank you for not giving up on me." As she waited for Lucia's response, Sarah felt a mixture of fear and determination. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she was willing to face it. The road to recovery would be long and difficult, full of ups and downs. But Sarah was taking the first step, and that was what mattered. With each breath, she promised herself that she would fight, that she would not let this darkness consume her completely. As sleep finally overtook her, Sarah held on to that small spark of hope. Tomorrow would be a new day, a new beginning. And this time, she wouldn't face it alone. The months of therapy were difficult for Sarah. Each session was like opening a wound that was just beginning to heal. But little by little, he began to feel that he was regaining control of his life. One fall afternoon, Sarah was walking through Central Park, enjoying the changing colors of the leaves. For the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. Suddenly, he bumped into someone. "Excuse me," Sarah exclaimed, looking up. She was met with kind blue eyes looking at her with concern. "No, excuse me," the man said, his voice soft and slightly accented. "I was distracted admiring the scenery." Sarah felt something strange in her chest, a sensation she hadn't experienced in a long time. "I'm David," the man introduced himself, extending his hand. "Sarah," she responded, shaking his hand and feeling an unexpected tingle. "Would you like to have a coffee?" David asked, pointing to a nearby stall. "To make up for almost knocking you down." Sarah hesitated for a moment. Her therapist had advised her to open herself to new experiences, but fear still lurked in the shadows of her mind. It's okay," she finally responded, surprising herself. As they walked to the coffee stand, Sarah noticed that David was limping slightly. "Are you okay?" she asked, worried. David smiled sadly. "Aftermath of a car accident. I lost my wife 3 years ago." Sarah's heart sank. "I'm so sorry," he said softly. "Thank you," David responded. "It's been a difficult road, but every day it gets a little easier." Sitting on a bench, coffees in hand, Sarah found herself sharing her own story. "I'm also trying to rebuild my life," he admitted. "My ex-husband, well, let's just say things didn't end well." David looked at her with understanding. "Pain changes us, doesn't it? But it also makes us stronger." Sarah nodded, feeling an unexpected connection with this stranger. Suddenly, his phone rang. It was a message from his boss, urgent. "We need you to come to the office. The client on the Riverside project wants to make last-minute changes." Sarah felt a wave of panic. The Riverside project had been his lifeline for the past few months, his way of staying afloat amid the emotional chaos. "I'm sorry," he said to David, getting up hastily. "I have an emergency at work." David stood up too. "I understand. It was nice meeting you, Sarah." As he walked away, Sarah felt a sudden urge. She turned around and saw David still looking at her. "Would you like to meet again?" she asked, surprising herself at her boldness. David's smile lit up his face. "I'd love to." They exchanged numbers quickly, and Sarah headed to the office, her heart pounding in a way it hadn't felt in a long time. In the taxi, as she reviewed the plans for the Riverside project on her tablet, Sarah realized she was smiling. "For the first time in months, I felt a spark of excitement about the future." But along with that excitement, came fear. Was she ready to open her heart again? What if she got hurt again? As the taxi pulled up in front of her office, Sarah made a decision. She wouldn't let fear control her. He would take one step at a time, meeting each challenge as it came, whether in his personal or professional life. With renewed determination, Sarah entered the building, ready to face the changes in the Riverside project and, perhaps, the changes in her own life. What Sarah didn't know was that this chance meeting with David would mark the beginning of a new chapter in her life, one full of challenges, but also hope and possibilities. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Sarah was ready to face it. Sarah stood in her apartment, staring at the phone in her hands. A week had passed since her meeting with David in the park, and her number was still there, undialed. Fear paralyzed her, freezing her fingers every time she tried to call him. "What am I doing?" she whispered to herself, her voice shaking. I can't go through this again." The memory of Michael's betrayal still burned in her chest, a wound that refused to fully heal. Sarah closed her eyes, breathing deeply to calm the whirlwind of emotions that threatened to drown her. Just then, her phone vibrated, startling her. It was a message from David. "Hi Sarah, I hope you're okay. I was wondering if you'd like to grab a coffee this weekend. No pressure, just a chat." Sarah felt her heart race. Part of her wanted to immediately say yes, but another part, the hurt and scared part, was screaming for her to run in the opposite direction. With trembling hands, he called Lucia. Well, her friend responded. Lucia, Sarah said, her voice breaking. I don't know what to do. David asked me out and I'm so scared. There was a moment of silence before Lucia spoke. Sarah, listen to me. I understand your fear, I really do. But you can't let what Michael did to you stop you from living. But what if he hurts me too? Sarah asked, tears threatening to fall. What if he doesn't? Lucia responded softly. Sarah, not all men are like Michael. You can't close yourself off from love for fear of getting hurt. Sarah looked out the window, looking at the city that never slept. I don't know if I'm strong enough, Lucia. You are stronger than you think, Lucia stated. You've been through so much and you're still standing. Giving someone new a chance doesn't make you weak, it makes you brave. After hanging up, Sarah stared at David's message. With a shaky sigh, he began to write, Hi David. I'd love to have coffee with you. How about Saturday? Before he could regret it, he pressed send. Immediately, he felt a wave of panic. What had he done? Was she ready for this? David's response came almost immediately, perfect. See you Saturday at 2 at the park cafeteria. I can't wait to see you. Sarah dropped the phone on the couch and covered her face with her hands. A mixture of excitement and terror invaded her. He was taking a step into the unknown, opening his heart again after so long. I can do this, she told herself, her voice barely a whisper in the quiet of her apartment. I am strong. I am brave. As she prepared for bed that night, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about Saturday. What would this new chapter of your life hold for you? Could I really trust again? The fear was still there, lurking in the shadows of his mind, but for the first time in a long time, there was also a spark of hope. The future was uncertain, but Sarah was determined to face it, one step at a time. With every beat of her heart, she repeated to herself, I am strong. I am brave. I deserve to be happy. Sarah was in her office, surrounded by plans and models. It had been 3 years since her divorce, and she had completely immersed herself in her work. Her determination and talent had led her to rise quickly in the architecture firm, and she was now in charge of one of the most important projects in the city. The ringing of her phone broke her from her concentration. It was his boss, Mr. Thompson. Sarah, I need to see you in my office right now, he said in a tone that Sarah couldn't decipher. With her heart pounding, Sarah headed to Mr. Thompson's office. Would there be any problem with the project? Had I made a mistake? Upon entering, he saw that Mr. Thompson was not alone. Next to him was a man Sarah immediately recognized as Robert Callahan, one of New York's leading real estate developers. Sarah, Mr. Thompson said with a smile, Mr. Callahan wants to talk to you about the Skyline project. Robert Callahan stood up and extended his hand. Miss Johnson, I have been following your work on the Skyline project and I must say that I am impressed. Sarah felt a mixture of pride and nervousness. Thank you, Mr. Callahan. It's an honor to hear that from you. Call me Robert, he said with a warm smile. I have a proposal for you. I want you to lead the design of my next big project, a mixed-use tower in the heart of Manhattan. Sarah felt short of breath. This was the opportunity of a lifetime, the kind of project he had dreamed of since he was a student. I don't know what to say, Sarah stuttered. Say yes, Mr. Thompson interjected. Sarah, this is a unique opportunity. You could become one of the most recognized architects in the city. Sarah looked at both men, feeling a mix of excitement and fear. Can I think about it? Robert nodded understandingly. Of course. Take the weekend to consider it. We'll meet on Monday to discuss the details. That night, Sarah was sitting in her apartment, looking out the window at the city that never slept. His phone rang, it was David. Hello, beautiful, said his warm voice on the other end of the line. How was your day? Sarah felt a wave of guilt. She had been so absorbed in work that she had barely spoken to David in recent weeks. David, he said, his voice shaking slightly. They offered me a huge project. It's the opportunity of a lifetime. That's wonderful, Sarah. David exclaimed. I'm so proud of you. Sarah felt tears gathering in her eyes. But David, if I accept, it will mean months of intense work. I will barely have time for anything else. There was a moment of silence on the line. Sarah, David finally said, his voice soft but firm. I love you, and I want you to be happy. If this is what you want, I will support you every step of the way. Tears began to fall down Sarah's cheeks. I love you so much, David. I don't know what I would do without you. We'll be fine, David assured. We'll find a way to make it work. After hanging up, Sarah stared at the city, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. On the one hand, she was excited for the career opportunity of a lifetime. On the other hand, she feared that by completely immersing herself in work, she might lose the most valuable thing she had, her relationship with David. He went to bed that night with a divided heart, knowing that the decision he made on Monday could change the course of his life forever. Could I really have it all? Or would you have to sacrifice one part of your life for another? As sleep overtook her, Sarah couldn't help but wonder if she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life, or if she was about to achieve her wildest dreams. Only time would tell. Sarah stood on the balcony of her apartment, looking out over the city that never slept. It had been 3 years since she met David, and her heart still pounded every time she thought of him. However, fear remained his constant companion, whispering doubts at the most unexpected moments. The sound of the door opening brought her out of her thoughts. David walked in, with a warm smile that lit up the entire room. Hello, beautiful, he said, leaning in to kiss her. What are you thinking about? Sarah felt a lump in her throat. It was now or never. David, he began, his voice trembling slightly. We need to talk. David's smile faded, replaced by a look of concern. What's wrong, Sarah? Is everything okay? Sarah took a deep breath, gathering all her courage. I love you, David. More than I ever thought I could love anyone after Michael. David nodded, waiting patiently for him to continue. But I'm so scared, Sarah confessed, tears threatening to fall. Every time I think about our future, a part of me wants to run and hide. What if I get hurt again? What if I'm not enough? David approached, taking her hands in his. Sarah, look at me, he said softly. I can't promise you that you'll never get hurt. Life doesn't work like that. But I can promise you that I will fight for us every day. That I will love you with every fiber of my being. Sarah felt tears begin to fall. But what if? There is no what if, David interrupted. Just us, here and now. I know you're afraid, I am too. Losing my wife taught me how fragile life can be. But it also taught me to value every moment, to love without reservation. He knelt in front of her, pulling a small box out of his pocket. Sarah held her breath, her heart beating so hard she thought it would burst out of her chest. Sarah Johnson, David said, his voice filled with emotion. I love you with all my heart. Would you do me the honor of marrying me? The world seemed to stop. Sarah looked at the ring, then at David, and back at the ring. All his fears, all his doubts, seemed to scream in his head. But then, in the midst of the chaos, a louder voice emerged. The voice of your heart. Yes, Sarah whispered, tears running freely down her cheeks. Yes, David. I will marry you. David stood up, placing the ring on her finger with trembling hands. They kissed, a kiss full of promises, hope, love. When they separated, Sarah looked David in the eyes. I'm scared, he admitted. But with you, I'm willing to face that fear. To take a leap of faith. David hugged her tightly. Together, my love. We will face everything together. As they embraced on the balcony, with the city lights as witnesses, Sarah felt something change inside her. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled her. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to dream of a future with David. What Sarah didn't know was that this moment of happiness was just the beginning. Fate had more surprises in store, some sweet, others bitter. But for now, in David's arms, Sarah felt invincible, ready to face whatever life threw her way. The wedding day dawned with a clear sky and a radiant sun, as if the universe itself was celebrating the union of Sarah and David. Sarah was in the hotel room, looking in the mirror while her best friend, Lucia, adjusted her veil. "You look beautiful, Sarah," Lucia said, tears in her eyes. "David is going to faint when he sees you." Sarah smiled, her heart beating with a mix of excitement and nervousness. "Thank you, Lucia. I can't believe this day finally came." Suddenly, a shadow of doubt crossed his face. Lucia noticed it immediately. "What's up, friend?" she asked, worried. Sarah took a deep breath. "It's just... what if I'm making a mistake? What if I get hurt again?" Lucia took Sarah's hands in hers. "Sarah, look at me. David is not Michael. What you have with him is real, it's pure. I've seen how he looks at you, how he treats you. That man adores you." Sarah nodded, feeling tears threatening to ruin her makeup. I know. It's just that sometimes fear is normal," Lucia interrupted. "But don't let it paralyze you. You deserve to be happy, Sarah. And David makes you happy." At that moment, someone knocked on the door. He was Sarah's father. "Are you ready, honey?" he asked, his voice filled with emotion. Sarah looked at Lucia, who gave her hand a comforting squeeze, and then at her father. "Yes, Dad. I'm ready." As they walked towards the chapel, Sarah felt like her heart was going to burst with happiness and nervousness. The music started playing and the doors opened. There, at the end of the hallway, was David. Their eyes met and the world seemed to stop. David's smile was so bright, so full of love, that all of Sarah's fears vanished in an instant. Step by step, Sarah moved toward her future. Every step was a promise, every heartbeat a confirmation that this was right. When she finally reached the altar, David took her hands. "You're beautiful," he whispered, his voice full of emotion. "We are gathered here today," the officiant began, "to celebrate the union of Sarah and David." As the officiant spoke, Sarah and David couldn't look away from each other. In David's eyes, Sarah saw everything she had always dreamed of: love, respect, companionship. "David," Sarah said when it came time for the vows, her voice shaking slightly. "There was a time when I thought I would never love again, that I would never trust again. But you changed all that. You taught me that true love exists, that I can be loved for who I am. I promise to love you every day, in good times and bad times. You are my best friend, my partner, my love." David smiled, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Sarah, from the moment I met you, I knew you were special. You have faced so much and yet, your heart is still so beautiful, so strong. You inspire me every day to be better. I promise to always be by your side, support you in your dreams, be your rock when you need it. I love you more than words can express." When the officiant declared them husband and wife, Sarah felt like her heart was going to burst with happiness. The kiss they shared was full of promises, dreams, a future together. As they walked down the aisle like newlyweds, surrounded by the applause and congratulations of their loved ones, Sarah realized that this was not the end of their story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with love, hope, and endless possibilities. "I love you," David whispered as they left the chapel. "And I to you," Sarah replied, her heart overflowing with happiness. Together, they walked into their future, ready to face any challenge life threw at them, knowing that as long as they were together, they could overcome anything. The conference room at the luxurious Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Manhattan was bustling with activity. Sarah, now a renowned architect, was in the middle of a major presentation for a new skyscraper project that would transform the city's skyline. His confidence and passion were evident as he explained the details of the innovative design to a group of impressed investors. And so, ladies and gentlemen, Sarah concluded with a radiant smile, we are not just constructing a building, we are creating a legacy for New York. Applause filled the room. Sarah felt a surge of pride and satisfaction. 10 years of hard work and determination had led her to this moment. As the attendees dispersed for the cocktail party, Sarah made her way to David, her husband, who was waiting for her with an admiring smile. "You were amazing, my love," David said, kissing her softly. Sarah blushed, still feeling butterflies in her stomach every time David looked at her like that. "Thank you, honey. I couldn't have made it this far without you." At that moment, a familiar voice cut through the air like a knife, making Sarah freeze in place. "Sarah? Sarah Johnson?" Slowly, Sarah turned, her heart pounding. There, a few meters away, was Michael, her ex-husband. The years had not been kind to him, his hair was streaked with gray and there were worry lines etched into his face. "Michael," Sarah said, her voice surprisingly firm. "It's been a long time." Michael approached, his eyes raking Sarah from head to toe, a mix of shock and regret in his gaze. "I saw your presentation," Michael said, stuttering slightly. "It was impressive. I always knew you would go far." Sarah felt a pang of pain as she remembered how Michael had belittled her ambitions during their marriage. But that pain no longer had power over her. "Thank you," Sarah responded with a polite but distant smile. Michael glanced nervously at David, who stood protectively at Sarah's side. "Oh, excuse me," Sarah said, her voice full of pride. "Michael, meet my husband, David." Michael's eyes widened, a mix of surprise and something that looked like jealousy crossing his face. "Nice to meet you," David said, extending his hand with a confident smile. Michael shook David's hand, visibly uncomfortable. "Likewise," he murmured. There was an awkward silence, filled with unsaid words and suppressed emotions. Sarah could feel the tension in the air, but it didn't affect her like before. "Sarah," Michael finally said, his voice heavy with regret. I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. For everything. I was an idiot and—" Sarah raised a hand, gently interrupting him. "Michael, that's in the past. I've moved on with my life, and I hope you've done the same." Michael nodded slowly, the reality of what he had lost reflecting in his eyes. "You've done it, Sarah. Everything you ever dreamed of, you've achieved it." Sarah smiled, this time with genuine warmth. "Yes, I have. And I'm happy, Michael. Truly happy." At that moment, a group of investors approached, eager to talk to Sarah about the project. "If you'll excuse me," Sarah said, "duty calls." As she walked away on David's arm, Sarah felt a sense of closure, as if the last chapter of her old life had finally closed. She looked at David, the man who had been by her side every step of the way, supporting her and loving her unconditionally. "Are you okay?" David asked softly. Sarah smiled, her heart overflowing with love and gratitude. "More than fine," he replied. "I am exactly where I should be." As they mingled with the crowd, Sarah couldn't help but look back one last time. She saw Michael standing alone, watching her with a mixture of admiration and regret. For a moment, she felt a pang of compassion for him. But then, turning to her future, Sarah knew she had gained much more than she had lost. The night continued, full of promise and new opportunities, and Sarah felt stronger and more confident than ever. The past no longer had power over her. The future, bright and full of possibilities, awaited her. The conference room at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel was bustling with activity. Sarah, now a renowned architect, was in the middle of an animated conversation with a group of investors when she felt a piercing gaze on her. As he turned around, his heart skipped a beat. There, a few meters away, was Michael, her ex-husband. The years had not been kind to him. His hair, once dark and thick, was now streaked with gray and had receded considerably from his forehead. Deep lines marked his face, and his suit, although expensive, seemed to hang from his figure as if he had rapidly lost weight. Sarah apologized to her group and, with her heart pounding, approached Michael. 10 years of repressed emotions threatened to overflow. "Michael," Sarah said, her voice surprisingly firm. "Sarah," he responded, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't expect to see you here." Sarah noticed how Michael's eyes roamed over her figure, stopping at the wedding ring on her left hand. "Things have changed a lot," Sarah said, a mix of pride and defiance in her voice. Michael nodded slowly, embarrassment evident on his face. "I know. I've followed your career. You're amazing, Sarah. I always knew you would be." Sarah felt a stab of pain at those words. "You knew that? Then why?" Michael looked down, unable to meet the intensity in Sarah's eyes. "I was an idiot, Sarah. The biggest idiot. I let go of the best thing that had ever happened to me for nothing." At that moment, David approached, gently placing his hand on Sarah's back. "Everything okay, honey?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Sarah felt a surge of love and gratitude toward her husband. "Yes, love. Meet Michael, my ex-husband." Michael's eyes widened as he saw David. Tall, handsome and with an air of quiet confidence, David was everything Michael no longer was. "Nice to meet you," David said, extending his hand. Michael shook her weakly, defeat written in every line of his face. "Sarah," Michael said, his voice breaking. I'm sorry. For everything. I know it's late, but I needed to tell you." Sarah felt tears threatening to come, but she held them back. "Thank you, Michael. That means a lot to me." Michael nodded, looking at David and then back at Sarah. "I'm glad you found happiness. You deserve it more than anyone." With those words, Michael turned and walked away, his shoulders slumping under the weight of regret. Sarah stood there, watching the man who had once been the center of her world walk away. She felt a mix of emotions, sadness for what could have been, relief at having moved on from that chapter in her life, and deep gratitude for the man who now stood by her side. David hugged her gently. "Are you okay?" he whispered in her ear. Sarah turned to him, a genuine smile lighting up her face. "Yes, my love. I'm better than ever." As they walked away together, Sarah felt as if an enormous weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The past no longer had power over her. She had faced her demons and emerged victorious. The future stretched out before her, bright and full of possibilities, with the man who truly loved and supported her by her side. Sarah was ready for whatever came, knowing that she had found not only professional success, but also the true, lasting love she had always longed for. Sarah stood on the balcony of the luxurious hotel where the business event was being held, her heart pounding after the unexpected encounter with Michael. The cool night air caressed his face, but it could not calm the storm of emotions that stirred inside him. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to come face to face with Michael, who was looking at her with a mix of regret and longing. "Sarah," Michael said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk?" Sarah felt her throat close up, but she managed to nod. "Sure, Michael." They were silent for a moment, the weight of 10 years of unspoken history between them. "You look happy," Michael began, his voice cracking slightly. "Your husband seems like a good man." Sarah nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. "It is. David, he saved me, Michael. He helped me believe in love again." Michael looked down, guilt evident on his face. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. For everything. I was an idiot and I ruined everything." Sarah felt tears threatening to fall, but she held them back. "Yes, you were," he said in a firm voice. "You broke me, Michael. I thought I would never recover." "I know," Michael responded, his voice full of remorse. "And there isn't a day when I don't regret what I did. Seeing you now, so successful, so happy, I realize how much I lost." Sarah looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in years. He was no longer the young and ambitious man he had been. He seemed tired, defeated. "What happened to Jessica?" Sarah asked, surprising herself at the lack of bitterness in her voice. Michael gave a humorless laugh. "She left me 3 years ago. For another man, earnings of life." Sarah felt a pang of compassion, but realized it no longer hurt. The power Michael once had over her had faded. "I'm sorry," he said sincerely. Michael looked at her with eyes full of regret. "I'm the one who's sorry, Sarah. I had everything a man could want and I threw it away. You're an amazing woman." Sarah took a deep breath, feeling a weight she had carried for years finally lift from her shoulders. "Thank you, Michael," he said softly. "I guess I needed to hear that." They were silent for a moment, the sound of the party inside the hotel a distant murmur. "Do you think you can ever forgive me?" Michael asked, his voice barely audible. Sarah looked at him, a mix of emotions crossing her face. "I already have, Michael," he said finally. "Not for you, but for me. I needed to let go of the past so I could embrace my future." Michael nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "You're a better person than I ever was, Sarah." At this moment, David appeared at the balcony door. "Everything okay, love?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Sarah smiled at him, feeling a surge of love and gratitude. "Yes, honey. Everything is fine." He turned to Michael one last time. "Goodbye, Michael. I hope you find the peace you are looking for." With those words, Sarah took David's hand and walked away, leaving behind not only Michael, but also the last vestiges of pain and resentment she had carried for so long. As they walked back to the party, Sarah realized that this meeting hadn't been about Michael at all. It had been about her, about finally closing that chapter of her life and fully embracing the love and happiness she had found with David. The future stretched out before her, bright and full of possibilities, and Sarah was ready to live it to the fullest, with the man who truly loved and valued her by her side. Sarah and David left the elegant event hall, leaving behind the buzz of the party and the past that Sarah had finally closed. The New York night enveloped them, the city lights shining like earthly stars. David took Sarah's hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. "Are you okay, my love?" he asked softly, his eyes filled with concern and love. Sarah breathed deeply, feeling the weight of 10 years of pain and doubt melt away with each exhale. "Yes," he replied, a genuine smile lighting up his face. "For the first time in a long time, I feel free." They walked in silence for a moment, the sound of their footsteps mixing with the bustle of the city. Sarah looked at David, the man who had been by her side for the last 7 years, supporting her, loving her unconditionally. "David," Sarah said, stopping and turning to face him. "Thank you. For everything. For loving me when I thought I didn't deserve to be loved, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." David's eyes moistened. "Sarah, my love," he whispered, gently caressing her cheek. "You saved me as much as I saved you. Every day with you is a gift." Sarah felt her heart swell with love. She stood on tiptoe and kissed David, a kiss full of promise and a bright future. When they separated, David smiled mischievously. "You know, I have a surprise for you." "A surprise?" Sarah asked, intrigued. David nodded, pulling an envelope out of his jacket. "Open it," he said, handing it to Sarah. With trembling hands, Sarah opened the envelope. Inside were 2 plane tickets to Paris and a reservation for a small chateau in the French countryside. "David," Sarah gasped, her eyes wide. "This is, when?" "Tomorrow," David replied, smiling. "I thought that after all this, we deserved a new beginning. A place where we could leave the past behind and focus on our future." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, but this time they were tears of pure happiness. "I love you so much," she whispered, hugging David tightly. "And I to you, my love," David replied, kissing her forehead. more than words can express. As they walked to her apartment, Sarah felt an emotion she hadn't experienced in years: hope. Hope for a bright future, full of love and new adventures. "Did you know?" Sarah said, looking at David with a smile. "I think I'm ready to talk about having children." David's eyes lit up. "Really? Sarah, that's wonderful." Sarah nodded, feeling a wave of emotion. "Yes, I think it's time to create our own family. A family full of love, trust, and happiness." David hugged her tightly, spinning her in the air. They both laughed, their laughter mixing with the sounds of the city. As they continued their walk home, Sarah looked up at the New York night sky. The stars shone dimly above the skyscrapers, silent witnesses to their triumph over pain and betrayal. If you like stories like this, subscribe to the channel. There will always be new videos, and you won't want to miss any of these thrills.